so deeply honored and grateful that you're joining me for a fresh approach to painting, Gateway to the Inner Artist. Just keep it up, number 1. We're going to paint a common sea, and common I mean that you find these seas in areas with rocks like Hawaii, Australia, the Shetland Islands, and the water is rushing through the rocks in a very busy pattern. And we're going to learn to paint that pattern very easily. I know it looks like a complicated painting, but it's not, because I'm going to share my signature Z-stroke. The reason why I use transparent raw sienna is because when I put in my dark colors over it, the transparent color will cover over very easily. So first, we think about where our shapes are. In this painting, we've got a big wave that's going to come up here and it's going to drop down. I'm not drawing this in, I'm just loosely identifying where I have my wave. And then I have a dark area where the wave ends, about here. Now, I don't want it smack dab in the middle, and I just did that. And that is human nature. So I'm going to move my spot over, and it doesn't matter because I used the transparent raw sienna. So see how that makes sense right away? And I'm going to put my under wave over to the left so it's not in the middle. And then I know that my water is going to go this way and it's going to go this way under the big wave. So I've got a big wave here. I've got my under area under the big wave. Now my water is going to move in this way from both sides. So I've got a little bit of V happening here. And I'm going to put in my rocks. I've got a couple rocks. I want a rock here, and I want it to go right off the page. That's good. I just roughed in my shape of the rock. Don't need to know exactly what that rock looks like right now. And I'm going to put another rock for balance because this is heavy. It feels heavy. I've got my big wave here. I need to have something heavy on this side. So that's going to come, that heaviness is going to come in the way of a rock. So I'm going to make this rock not go off the canvas like this one does. This is a long, tall rock, and it's moving this way. The rock shape is moving this way. Of course, rocks don't move. And this one, I'm going to make a heavy rock, but I'm not going to have it go off the canvas. So I'm going to leave a white area underneath that rock. I'm going to look at this and say, do I like the shape of my composition? Do I see that I have water in the background? I have a huge wave coming up this way. I have busy water in this area, and I have two solid rocks that are going to anchor my composition. That's pretty good. So now I know exactly where my shapes are on my composition. I'm going to go over these areas with my hooker green and alizarin crimson. That gives me my darkest dark. I'm going to go ahead and just fill in these areas, the water loosely here. Again, this is going to give me shadow. Yep. And then I know this area up here is going to be darker. So I'm going to pick up some phthalo blue, some hooker green, and alizarin crimson. And I'm going to fill in this area in horizontal shapes because I know that's background water. Now, this is a fun part. I'm going to fill in my rocks with the dark color of the hooker green and alizarin crimson. Fill in my rock shape. See, it's already starting to look like a rock. Excellent. And I accomplished that by just moving my brush around. Notice I'm going to do it here so you can see. I'm just moving my brush up and down. I'm moving my whole arm. I'm standing and painting, and when you stand and paint, you use your whole body. When you sit down and paint, you're going to make small, tiny little movements, and that doesn't work very well for water. So it's a great idea, if you can, to stand up. When you put in a stroke, you're using your whole body, not just your arm. So I'm going to continue to fill in my rock. And now I have to let that dry. So now that that's dry, I'm going to go ahead and still keep with the same brush I've been using, just because I like the feel of this brush. You'll have favorites too. I'm going to pick up some phthalo green yellow shade. Now this color is quite versatile when you're painting water. This color is used for Caribbean water. It works beautifully for under waves. So this is the underneath section of my wave. I still need to add a little yellow to that. Okay, so I'm putting in my shadow, and I'm also putting in the underneath section of my wave. So when the wave splashes over and you see that little bit of sunlight shining through, that's what we're painting right here. Now I've got the same thing happening over in this area, so I'm going to pick up some of that phthalo green yellow shade, and I'm going to put it right here at the top of where this small wave is going to be. And following my rule, whatever you do in one area, add just a touch of that color to the other areas of the canvas, and that will give you some interest. So now we're going to really get into that Z stroke. Right now I'm just filling in some area with color. Okay, I think I've added enough of that. I'm always going to be conscious of my Z stroke. Let me show you how that is done. I'm going to pick up some phthalo blue, wet my brush, and I'm going to start doing that Z stroke. What you do is you pull your brush in a diagonal, and as if you're making the mark of Zorro or an infinity symbol, you would come back around and make a loop. When you're making the loop, you pick your brush up off the canvas. So down, and then my arm goes around, but I'm not touching the canvas. Then I touch down in the center of that mark. So I know at first it might seem a little awkward, but look, it forms a perfect wave every time. I'm going to do this in these darker areas. This is going to give me a little background to my wave. I'm going to do some Z strokes. Pick up some more phthalo blue because I know this is a darker area. And I'm going to put some of those that color with the phthalo blue and little hooker green. Put in some dark areas and draw all the way, make those Z strokes all the way down to the foreground. When I reach the foreground, my Z strokes are wide. When I'm up here in the middle ground, my Z strokes are shorter and closer. So shorter and closer in the middle of the painting, wider and deeper, meaning further apart in the foreground. I've got to let that dry. So now we're going to put in our shadows, and we make our shadow by putting blue violet with a touch of portrait pink. That is a vibrant, vibrant gray. And I like to make my shadows with that color. So I know I have some shadow in this area. This is underneath where the wave is coming over. So there'll be, the sun is coming from, where is the sun coming from? The sun is going to come from really pretty much this area, and then it shines right down the center of the painting. It's going to shine mostly in this area. So that means this would definitely be shadow. See how I figured that out? So that's going to be shadow there. I'll have a little bit of shadow up in this area because this is in the distance. My colors are always a little bit lighter in the distance, so I'll add a little bit of shadow here, not necessarily doing as much of a Z-stroke, mainly just putting the color in. So we've got some shadow on the front of our rocks, so it's safe to go ahead and put some more of this blue violet and portrait pink just on the fronts of the rock. I can always paint it out, but I'm sure that I'm going to have some shadow mixed in with my rock. Now, I've got shadow up here underneath the wave. And actually, I'm going to have more shadow on this side because the wave is coming down and splashing. Okay, and I have two more areas where I have shadow. So I'll pick up some more paint. Notice I'm carefully doing this because it is important that I get the right colors in the right area. I'm going to go ahead and put some shadow right over the top of this dark area of the wave and also on the side. Also, now the underneath part of the wave, the big wave, is going to have shadow too. So I'm going to put some of this here. I'm pretty much just roughing it in. I'm not making any specific shapes. I'm just trying to get the color into the canvas. And I'm covering up my raw sienna because I don't need it anymore. Keeping the shape of the wave. This is the under part of the wave. And there we have it. That looks pretty good. Okay, so the next step is to take my phthalo blue and my brush nice and wet, and I'm going to do the Z stroke again. This is a wonderful stroke that you need to learn because it makes painting water super simple. Whether you're painting busy water or you're painting totally calm water, you're going to use this Z stroke all the time once you learn how to do it. So I'm going to fill in this entire area with phthalo blue and the Z stroke. Now I've decided I'm going to put another small rock right here, and that's going to break up the monotony of all the rushing busy water. But this rock is not going to be as big as these other two. And I need to add a little more hooker green to my big rock. And remember, this rock goes right off the canvas, so fill that in completely. Okay, maybe I've painted a little too much shadow on this rock, so let's go back in and let's just give it some more definition with our hooker green and alizarin crimson. And as your painting dries, you're going to make these decisions. So we're good. This is an anchor rock, anchoring the canvas composition, so it's important that it has its dark areas. My phthalo blue, I'm going to go back to that, pick up a little hooker green and mostly phthalo blue though, and I'm going to fill in this area. Now, in this middle section, the sun is going to hit the water more than it hits it on the two sides. So I'm just going to fill in a little bit of blue and wider waves. I'm going to focus on leaving this center area mostly white. I'm going to switch brushes to a large angled brush, and I'm going to finish putting in my light blue violet sky. I'm going to take that all the way over to where my wave is. Now I need to add a little Prussian blue, and I'm going to just pick up a little white. So I have Prussian blue and white on my brush, and I am going to make horizontal strokes in that background area. Take it up to my blue sky. So I'm picking up, while I'm doing that, that's wet, I'm picking up a little bit of that blue and taking it right down to where this small wave begins. Now see how my hooker green, there's a little bit of hooker green from when I roughed in my background. I'm still seeing that through the Prussian blue and the white. Phthalo blue, which we're using down here, is a dye color. So now I have my roughed in area where my sky and water is. I'm happy with that. I'm going to go back and fine tune that later. But for now, I want to start with my white. I'm going to use the edge of my brush, and I am going to start putting in the white foam of the wave. And I will start right at the shadow. Since this is dry, this is working. And I'll completely do this entire area where the white fluffy waves are. So I'm going to keep adding white to my Prussian blue up here, and that's going to put in my water. As this dries, you'll add just layer after layer until you fill in all your white area. Take it all the way down to this shadow that we just put in. Again, still working with white. I've changed my brush to a little smaller brush. You're welcome to do that. Work with the ones that are easier for you to manage and handle. Okay, well, I'm happy with that, and I'm going to let that dry now. Drying is a key element in this painting. Let your layers dry. Get familiar with the Z stroke. And we're going to put this in. I'm going to move a little faster now that you've seen how to do it. And because it's fun. Pick up some more paint. I'm picking up phthalo blue, little hooker green, little alizarin, just what's on my palette. Your colors actually will mix together on your palette, and you can just keep on using them. I'm just putting in my darks. I'm going to continue the Z stroke. Remember, all your dark area, keep focusing on that no-tan that you have, and you also have a thumbnail in your paperwork for this class. But I am creating the movement. My water is coming down this way. The water from the right is coming in this way. So when I'm putting in my Z-strokes, I'm making sure that I'm keeping that shape in mind as well. Because once you master that Z-stroke, you can make it any size and depth that you need it to be to do this. And I'm going to fill in some nice long Z-strokes. I'm going to paint over this with lighter colors. So right now, I'm using the Z-stroke to create my shape and my movement. You can see this starting to form. If you want that water to dip down, then go ahead, take your brush, and make a Z-stroke on an angle. And continue this until you fill in this entire area. Again, this is your background, so you want a nice amount of Z-strokes in these colors because they're going to actually create your depth automatically. Now it's time to put in the fluffy part of the wave, or the wave that is crashing down, and then you have air and fluffiness, almost cloud-like sprays that come up. We're going to use white and just use the edge of your brush and start placing that fluffiness in. Now I'm coming over some of my shadow, don't worry, because I'll go in and put in more shadow. Painting is done in layers. My white goes all the way up in this area. This is the white spraying up. Be thinking about the wave as you're doing this. Okay, and more white. You're going to use quite a bit of white in this part of the exercise. When I come up to this top area, I'm just tapping to get some odd shapes, not painting it solid, but I'm already starting to get the edges of my wave shaped by doing this. And when I feel comfortable with the amount of white that I've put in, I'm going to add some shadow using my violet. My blue violet. I'm scuffling this so much. Scuffling is a term that's used to kind of rub or scuffling, scrumbling. Oh, everybody has their own version of this word. But you get the point. It's a very descriptive word. All right, still forming my shape. Now I know it's not solid white, and I know that the shadow is fluffy but darker underneath the wave. So I'm going to put back in that shadow area by adding a little bit of my blue violet and portrait pink mixture, which gives me a light shadow. Now I'm going to take, since I have some on my paint, and I'm going to put in some shadow in the middle part of my wave. This way it's not monotonous. Add a little blue there. And I'm going to create a shape, moving my brush. You see how I'm moving my brush around? I'm using the end of my angled brush. I'm going to turn my canvas on its side and do some Z-strokes up in this area. Now the reason I'm doing that, if I had it straight up and down, I'd have to turn my arm like this. So make painting easy and fun. So I'm going to put in some Z-strokes using my shadow, and I'm going to keep in mind that my wave, this is the under part of my wave. So this just goes right up. I'm creating the shape with a rocking motion because I know that this is going to go up into the wave. This is actually the spray that takes you right up to the top of your wave. Okay, but fall short of the green. But see how now you have movement in that wave? You can actually angle it slightly more if you need to. Again, I'm using Z strokes. Okay. Now that the bottom is completely dry, it's time to put the top layer of Z strokes over the dark part that we laid in. So I'm going to use light permanent blue and a little bit of white. And I'm going to now do Z strokes right over the top of the dark areas. I'm going to completely cover the bottom of my painting with this color. So light permanent blue and white, keeping in mind the movement of my water. I'm filling in the white areas as well. White areas meaning the area of the canvas that has no paint on it. Making sure that my Z's are shorter and narrower up in this area. Longer and deeper in this center area. And I'll take these long, deep strokes right down into my foreground. I'm careful to make my strokes wide enough that the darkness is showing through. This is going to give you instant depth. Now earlier I talked about where I wanted my rocks, and I initially thought in the composition that I was going to take this rock all the way to the bottom, but I've changed my mind, and you have poetic license to change your mind as an artist. This is the creative part, you infusing your thoughts into a painting or an image that you've taken that you're using as a reference, not copying an image, but letting that image influence you. So I've decided that I don't want this rock to go all the way to the bottom. I want this rock to stop short. And I'm going to put some nice water down below the rock. Well, how do I change that? Easy. I just take the color that I'm working with and some Z strokes. I'm going to pick up some maybe phthalo blue, any color that's on your brush. I have some permanent on my brush still. I didn't clean my brush. That just adds to interest by leaving the paint on your brush. And I'm going to take my Z strokes all the way over underneath my rock to the edge of the canvas. So I'm following my rule of adding color to different parts of the painting. And I've introduced light permanent blue. So I want to take some of this light permanent blue and I just want to introduce it up in this area. I'm going to put a little bit over here. Use my Z strokes. Maybe scumble up my Z stroke a little bit. I'm introducing this permanent, light permanent blue. So I want it to not just be a layer over these waves. I want it to be here and here. So blue, blue, and blue. That takes the viewer's eye right around the canvas. So now I'm going to wet up my brush, and I've switched to a softer brush because I'm going to soften up the area underneath the wave. So I've got a nice wet brush. I'm going to put a little bit of my watered down shadow, and I'm going to make my tapping underneath this wave. Now I'm not making the Z-stroke. I am now just tapping the paint underneath this wave and taking this tapping motion of wet paint. It's almost dribbling down. And I'm taking it all the way up to the top of that wave. What this is doing, this shadow, is creating a layer to give the illusion that the wave is coming up and the light is shining through. If you just use the phthalo green yellow shade, it'd look okay, but it would not look complete. This is an important part of this painting. So I'm going to do it in small increments too. I've got a nice wet soft brush and I'm just tapping. You see how that water's running? That's okay that it's running. It's pretty good actually. Okay, and I'm going to just tap this whole area. Add some more white in, and I'm going to continue tapping with this very soft brush. This is giving me a whole different shape because I've changed brushes. And use your brushes to aid your creation. Here, see I'm tapping over where the green, the layer where the green touches the white. If I do that, I don't see harsh lines, and that's important, not to see harsh lines. And I'm going to continue with this brush because I like the shapes that it's creating. And I'm going to form my waves. There we go. Keep forming layer after layer, letting it dry in between until your waves are nice and fluffy. So I'm looking here and I've got a lot of shadow in this area. I don't feel the white, like a white billow right here in the center. Well, not center of the painting, because remember, you don't want to do it in the center. I'm going to take this and move it slightly to the right. I'm going to take some solid white and I'm going to make a poof right here with this soft brush. This is going to be the top of my wave. And see how the shadow is just peering through, and as it dries, it's going to completely change because acrylic changes and dries darker than when it's put on. So continue doing this area. Now, I'm going to get change brushes because I want to move back to my Z strokes. Okay, this is a nice brush, again with a chiseled edge. So I'm going to get some white on my brush. I've got this beautiful layer of waves using my Z stroke, and I used a light permanent blue with the white. So now I'm using pure white, and I'm going to go over these. So this is like a third layer of Z strokes. And in some areas, I'm going to scumble up my Z strokes. I'm going to take some white and I'm going to tap, tap, tap. That's where the water is hitting another part of the water and it's making a splash. Of course, that would happen here, wouldn't happen up here. It would happen right in this bottom area where both rushes of water are converging. So have fun with this. Continue with your layers. Put the white in the center where the light is hitting it the most. I'm going to take the edge of my brush, my chiseled edge. I'm going to move up to this right wave. This is a small baby wave. And I'm going to tap, tap, tap with the white. That's going to give me some splashing over the top of the green. Same as we did on the left side with the wash. Just tapping some white over that, giving you the feeling that the water is coming up over and splashing. Sun's shining through this part where it's the phthalo green yellow shade. So rocks aren't as hard as you would think they are. It's really a matter of focusing on shape. First, we're going to go back to our wash brush, just like we created the dribbles underneath the wave, and I'm going to take the same paint, the shadow, and I'm going to identify where the water is going to dribble over the rock. And I think it's going to happen right here in this crack. Okay, so I've let the water dribble down where it would naturally dribble. And I'm going to go over here on this side and do the same thing with this brush. If there's not enough water on the brush, it won't dribble. So, dribbles. Okay. Now, I'm going to come up from the bottom part and pull the paint up. I'm giving my rock some shape with this shadow color. I'm going to tap the top part of my rock to flatten out some parts of the rock. I'm forming my rock by using my wash brush and the water that's rushing over the top of the rock. Coming up from the bottom and just pulling up some shadow over the dark area. There. Now, when that dries, I'll have natural water dripping over the rock. I'm going to go back in and touch my hooker green and alizarin crimson, my darkest dark, and I'm just going to tap my rock in areas. I'm not going to solidly cover that rock. I'm going to touch areas of the rock. I have a little extra alizarin crimson on my brush. That's okay, because when this dries, it'll be very interesting. So play with that until you get your rocks exactly the way you want. If you don't like the way the rock turned out, well, go back in, paint over it with alizarin crimson and hooker green, and then do your dribbles again. It's very easy. Okay, now we're going to go back up to our wave in the distance, pick up some Prussian blue. I still have my wash brush. I'm fine with this brush. And I'm just going to put in some wave shapes. This is another area that you can work with. You're going back and forth with this painting from one area to the other because you don't want the viewer to know what you painted first and what you painted second. So your layers will give you that. The moving around the canvas will give you that ability to end up with a beautiful painting of rushing water. So we have depth, we have cohesiveness of color, we have a great deal of movement, and we've used our Z-stroke in many different aspects of the painting to create fun, easy water.